Alright, so this video will focus on chapter 24, which encompasses the transformation of Europe. Alright, ignore that part. So one of the most critical developments in European history is the fragmentation of Western Christendom. Ignore that. So these are just some examples of previous. These are just some previous examples of, like, when religion, more in other instances where religion has morphed into or fragmented into varying factions. So this fragmentation all begins with a man named Martin Luther, who attacks the Roman Catholic Church, practices in 1517. His major gripe was indulgences, which were preferential pardons for charitable donors, basically a ticket to heaven to those who can afford it. He writes the 95 Theses, listing his complaints, and these are rapidly reproduced with new printing technology. Of course, the Pope gets really pissed off and excommunicates him in 1521. However, this does not stop dissent from spreading throughout Germany and Switzerland in the 1520s and 1530s. So, if you need a nice little quote to summarize what indulgences are, this Johann Tetzel's quote is a great example of this. As soon as a coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. Basically, as soon as someone pays indulgence, the soul will escape hell and get into heaven. Luther eventually expands his critique of the Catholic Church, and advocating for the closure of monasteries, translations of Bible into vernacular or local languages, and the end of the priestly authority, especially the Pope. He also wants to return to biblical text verse authority, or sola scriptura, in Latin. In essence, he felt the Catholic Church was too concerned with wealth and power, and saw it as hypocritical and corrupt, too bureaucratic. German princes, however, seized this as a way to break away from the Church and assert local control over and gain independence in place of the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. As a result, support for reform spreads throughout Germany. Switzerland and the Low Countries followed Germany. In England, you have King Henry VIII, who has a conflict with the Pope over a requested divorce. He forms his own church by 1560. In France, you have John Calvin codifies the Protestant teachings while in exile in Geneva and adds the very absurd and strict principle of predestination, basically saying that when you're born, you are automatically consigned to hell or heaven, and there's nothing you can do about it. Scotland, Netherlands, and Hungary also experienced reform movements as well. To counter this, the Catholic Church launches the Counter-Reformation, beginning the Council of Trent, lasting from 1545 to 1563. This encompassed periodic meetings to discuss reform, clarify doctrine, and strengthen their spiritual commitment. It also established the Society of Jesus, or Jesuits, founded by St. Ignatius of Loyola. These Jesuit priests were given rigorous religious and secular education in order to make them effective missionaries and shock troops for the Catholic Church. These 10 times obviously lead to some unfortunate social upheavals, which can provoke hysteria. This hysteria manifested in the form of witch hunts, which were most prominent in regions of tension between Catholics and Protestants. No surprises there. And there was a late 15th century development in the belief in the devil, and and also the idea that the devil can control certain humans. In 16th centuries, you had approximately 110,000 people put on trial and some 60,000 executed. The vast majority were females, usually single and widowed, basically marginalized people. They were blamed for crop failures, miscarriages, etc. Now, in New England, you have a smaller case of 234 witches tried and 36 getting hanged. The fragmentation of Western Christendom also provokes a slew of bloody religious wars. One example is France, with the Protestant Huguenots and the Roman Catholics duking it out from 1562 to 1598. In 1588, Philip II of Spain attacks England to force return to Catholicism. And that's why he sent out his beautiful armada. However, this fails, and as English fire ships on the so-called Protestant Rhine, really a storm, destroy his fleet. Also, you have the Protestant Netherlands rebelling against Catholic Spain, gaining effective independence by 1610. The big religious war was the 30 Years' War, lasting from 1618 to 1648. It all begins when the Holy Roman Emperor attempts to force the Bohemians to return to the Roman Catholic Church. However, this quickly escalates into a war that engulfs all of Europe. You have Spanish, French, Dutch, German, Swedish, Danish, Polish, Bohemian, and Russian involvement, with the principal battleground being Germany. Political and economic issues were involved, but religious differences had to complicate matters. This, unfortunately, would become the most destructive European conflict before the 20th century, with a third of Germans getting killed. Emperor Charles V. Now, you also get the consolidation of states around this time. Emperor Charles V attempts to revive the Holy Roman Empire as a strong center of Europe through a series of marriages, political alliances, and dynastic ties. He was the only peer to Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire. However, he fails. The Protestant Reformation provides cover for local princes to assert greater independence, as well as the fact you had foreign opposition from France and the Ottoman Empire in order to maintain balance of power. Also, he really didn't have his heart wasn't really in it, and eventually he just retires to a monastery and splits up his holdings. Unlike China and India and in this period, the Ottoman Empire, Europe does not develop as a single empire, rather individual states. This leads to incredibly aggressive competition between the new monarchies that lead some of these governments in order to survive. So this is a map of Europe in 1559. We got Poland here, Russia here, Sweden, England, Scotland, Ireland, Spain. This becomes a major. Countries like various nation states, like the ones I've just mentioned, France, Spain becomes a very important role model in terms of the new monarch because they began aggressively centralizing. We can see this is outline the Holy Roman Empire. However, this was just a loosely aligned principalities that we, as I've seen before, will break away from the emperor. These are the Austrian Habsburg possessions and the Spanish Habsburg possessions. The new monarchs were more centralized, and they gained more independent authority because of the Reformation. They had large centrally administered bureaucracies, which were aided by the printing press, cannons of gunpowder, and standing professional armies, as well as increased state revenues for taxes. Local aristocrats couldn't keep up because they just couldn't afford to outfit large armies with guns. Only monarchs could do that. Italy was well developed as an economic power for trade, manufacture, finance into the 11th century. However, England, France, and Spain surged ahead in the 16th century because of innovative new tax revenues. One such example of trying to centralize control was the Spanish Inquisition, established by Fernando and Isabel in 1478. The original task was to search for fake Christians, secret Jews, and Muslims. It was later reoriented to search for Protestants after 1517, and intimidated nobles who might have considered Protestantism and helped the monarchs centralize power. England and the Netherlands, however, do not go down the monarchy path, instead go down the constitutional state path, as they develop institutions of quote-unquote popular representation. Now, do not confuse these as actual legitimate democracies. Really, power was more concentrated. Really, the voting power was probably more concentrated in the propertied white male group, especially in England, because the Parliament was by no means directly elected by the people. That, to most people, was just unheard of. In England, you had a constitutional monarchy, and in the Netherlands, you had a republic. In terms of the constitutional monarchy in England, there was a powerful parliament that represented the interests of some people, not all, just the aristocrats. And however, this ensured a system of shared authority, so it could limit so basically the king's power was limited, and you don't have a case where one idiot makes a really dumb mistake and sends the entire country down with him, as you had in the case of Spain. You also had state support for the maritime trade and commerce, and recognition of some individual and constituent rights. This would also give England a boost over Spain because you could have more independent merchants. However, things weren't always so great for England because they had a lovely civil war from 1642 to 1649, which illustrates the friction between parliamentarian and royal forces. It begins with parliamentarian opposition to royal taxes. However, you had a religious element to it, with the Anglican Church of England favoring the complex ritual, complex church hierarchy, complex church hierarchy, which was opposed by the Calvinist Puritans. King Charles I and the parliamentary armies clash. The king loses his head in 1649. The Puritan quote-unquote Roundheads take over and become a distasteful dictatorship with Oliver Cromwell. However, the monarchy becomes restored in 1660. However, fighting continues to resume, particularly thanks to especially the religion. However, it is resolved in a bloodless coup called the Glorious Revolution. King James II is deposed, and daughter Mary and his daughter Mary and her husband William Orange take the throne. This establishes a shared governance between the crown and parliament, reaffirming the constitutional monarchy I talked about before. This allowed for a flexible social system, again giving England a better advantage over Spain, because Spain is just too rigid to adapt. The Dutch Republic also emerges from a bloodbath, from a crucible of war. Beginning with King Philip II of Spain attempting to suppress Calvinists in Netherlands in 1566. However, a large-scale rebellion follows, with the Netherlands declaring independence by 1581. Its government was based on a representative parliamentary system. Absolute monarchies, on the end, were as we said before, were very centralized. The monarchs invoke the theory of the divine right of kings. Basically, the king derives his authority from God alone and is not accountable to his subjects. He is above the law. French absolutism was designed by Cardinal Richelieu under King Louis VIII. He destroyed castles of nobles, crushed aristocratic conspiracies, and built a bureaucracy to bolster the royal power base. He ruthlessly attacked Calvinists as well. French absolutism reaches its peak under King Louis XIV, or the Sun King. Basically, the best phrase to encapsulate his political beliefs can be quoted and can be summarized in this nice little quote, which I'm surely going to butcher my awful French. L'état c'est moi, basically saying this: I am the state. He built a magnificent palace of Versailles in the 1670s and uses it as his court. It is the largest building in Europe, with 1,400 fountains and 25,000 fully grown trees being transplanted into the area. He quote-unquote encouraged, more like pressured, to the nobility to live at Versailles, where he could distract them and entertain with his beautiful palace, with his lavish holdings, while he spies on them. So this is a picture of Louis XIV. As we can see, he is definitely an absolute monarch because of his lavish robes and because of his lavish clothing, to illustrate that I am the king and only I am the leader of France. In Russia, you have their absolutist is Peter I, or the Great. He worked very hard to modernize Russia based on the Western European model, thinking Russia as too backward to survive without doing this. He did a grand and also really messy tour of Western Europe to see what was Western Europe's secret sauce to success. When he returned, he sought to emulate Western fashions. In fact, he cut off the beards of traditionalists in order to force them to adapt to his policies. He also increased pay for peasants who served for life as soldiers, with St. Petersburg serving as a base for naval operations. He also began training and obtaining modern weapons for his troops. Under a later Tsar named Catherine II, there's a huge military expansion, and she begins cutting up Poland from 1772 to 1797. This, unfortunately, became a very common theme of Polish history, if you know anything about it. She initially does some social reforms at first, but these end after the Pugachev Rebellion from 1773 to 1774. The European state system was established at the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 at the 30 Years' War. The system still remains to this day, which basically means no imperial or papal authority to mediate regional disputes. States are quote unquote equal and sovereign. However, unfortunately, a lot of countries have not lived up to that ideal, to say the least. Nations could, in theory, had direct control over their internal affairs, and there were no more rulers of religion. There was also a heavy emphasis on balance of powers, as the concept of balance of powers as the nexus of European diplomacy. Basically, here's how it goes. If one country becomes too powerful, the other countries should gang up on them and suppress that country to prevent the balance of power being tipped in one country's favor. And this is a map of Europe after the Peace of Westphalia. As we can see, it is an absolute mess. But that's the Peace of Westphalia. We have Scotland here, England here, Spanish kingdoms and dependencies, the ginormous Ottoman Empire, Portugal, Spanish Netherlands, Dutch Republic, the Kingdom of Denmark, Kingdom of Sweden, the Tsardom of Russia, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and just an absolute, and the Holy and the various states in Italy, and as we can see in the former Holy Roman Empire, just an absolute mess of various principalities. This would unfortunately be a reality for most of Europe, and as we can see, we can also see that a lot of various territories have been gone to other countries. Unfortunately, this will be hold true for most of German history until 1871, when Germany is reunified. The frequent wars and balances of power diplomacy drain resources, but ultimately strengthen Europe as a whole. So I guess this is a case where war is good. The intense military competition. The military competition was extremely intense, unlike in China and India and the world of Islam, where basically one power ruled overall. So there was really not much incentive to develop well-trained, well-disciplined, and well-equipped armies. Whereas in Europe, you had to, otherwise you'll die. By 1700, Europe led the world in armaments, training, and discipline. And it didn't really help the fact that the Polish partition really drove this forward. This message of you have to strengthen or you will die. Almost Meiji Japan will think such similar when they see the Philippines getting annexed by America. The Columbian Exchange led to an overall net rapid growth in population. Despite the decimation of native populations, the introduction of New World crops to the Old World dramatically improved nutrition. Especially with the potato replacing the bread as a staple of diet. This better nutrition reduces people's susceptibility to plague, with epidemic diseases winding down by the mid-17th century. As we can see such the population growth of Europe. It's growing significantly from around 80 million in 1500 to 180 million in 1800. Now, I know today that's kind of paltry. 180 million. That's only half the population. That's only roughly half the population of the U.S. But at the time, it was significant. We also see an increasing trend towards urbanization as we can see, the city populations dramatically increase. Early capitalism involved private parties offering goods and services on a free market with private initiative and less government control. The laws of supply and demand determined the prices. You also had the development of banks, stock exchanges, and insurance companies, the rise of the joint stock companies, for example, English East India and the VOC. Basically, capitalism goes hand in hand with empire building, almost kind of like United Fruit Company in a way. Medieval guilds are eventually discarded in favor of the putting out system, which basically entails, the merchant takes all the raw materials to rural countryside dwellers, where they develop it into finished cloth, which the merchant takes to town to sell. Basically, think of that as outsourcing in those days. Capitalism in the rural in the capitalism for rural residents improved access to manufactured goods, as well as increasing opportunities in urban as well as providing more as well as also depleting their populations because cities had plenty or job-rich areas where rural residents would go in order to get a better work. The inefficient institution of serfdom is abandoned in Western Europe. However, it is retained and increased in Russia until the 19th century due to the fact that Eastern Europe needed to provide the raw materials for Western Europe's development. The nuclear family replaces the extended family with women entering the income-earning force. The rise of capitalism is parallel to the rapid growth of Europe's middle class, the world's first. One of the major proponents of this capitalist society was Adam Smith, who was an early who argued that capitalism ultimately improved society as a whole. However, capitalism wasn't always great, as the major social changes increased poverty in some sectors with a rise in crime and witch hunt, and possibly provoking witch hunting because it may have been a consequence due to capitalist tensions and the switching of gender roles. During this time period, you had before the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution, you had the Geocentric System, based on the 2nd century Greek scholar Ptolemy, which basically entails a motionless surf inside 9 concentric spheres. Christians understand heaven as the last sphere. However, this was a really terrible model when actually tested with observed planetary movements. So in 1543, Nicholas Copernicus proposes his heliocentrism theory. This is a massive paradigm shift in the beginning of the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution really kicks off with Johann Kepler and Galileo Galilei reinforcing the Copernican model, with Kepler determining that orbits are elliptical, not circular. Galileo, also using his telescope, observes that heavens are not perfect spheres, rather pockmarked and having various features. Isaac Newton revolutionized the study of physics as he concluded that the stars and planets were part of a unified system governed by the same natural laws, especially universal gravity. He obtained this knowledge from observation and mathematics, and it was a rigorous challenge to church doctrines, which heavily emphasized dogma. This was huge until the Enlightenment, which applied the revolutionary approaches of natural sciences to social sciences. It's heavily emphasized reason and reflection over revelation and retribution. The Enlightenment enlightened scholars were primarily deists. They believe many scholars in the Enlightenment were deists who believed in an impersonal watchmaker god who created the universe but left it to its own devices. These thinkers attempt to discover natural laws of politics, with Montesquieu discussing checks and balances, Locke on the social contract versus divine right, Smith on the laws of economics. The center of the Enlightenment is in France, with the philosophes or public intellectuals. One of the most prominent was Voltaire, who launched caustic attacks on the oppressive Roman Catholic Church, and even going to the length of crush the damn thing. He also attacked. Sorry for the typos. He also attacked the monarchy, showing admiration for English constitutionalism. One of the key ideas of the Enlightenment was the theory of progress. As most philosophies were optimistic and believed in progress, they assumed that the Enlightenment thought would ultimately lead to human harmony and material wealth. Basically, you can summarize with Kant's statement of dare to know. But it did not come to pass, at least not immediately, because as we all know, reign of terror, imperialist exploitation, Auschwitz, ISIS, slavery, colonialization, just the whole shebang. But you do get the metric system, progressive taxes, maybe the Common Core idea, maybe the global climate deal. Thank you very much for listening.